I am going to introduce Scott. But first, let me say that I cannot imagine the day that I would find a photographer who shoots more pictures than Ben Chrisman. But I look up on Facebook and he is shooting on Instagram and he's shooting all the time. He is just constantly seeing, constantly shooting the square black and white photo that we've known and love. I'm very honored to have um, a speaker from the industry, my old industry of photojournalism, and a new friend, Scott Strazzante.
Nice. Good morning. Thanks for waking up. I appreciate that. So it's weird being at a wedding photo conference because I've been married twice and divorced twice. So like I've used a lot of you guys out there, and I'm gonna keep doing it till I get it right. So next time I don't know how I'm gonna be able to choose, So that's gonna be the difficult thing. But thanks for having me here. Like he mentioned, he used to be a photojournalist. And as someone who went to college to be a business major to take over my dad's tire dealership, and then kind of fell into art, and then fell into photography, I learned by studying other people's work. And early on, when I would get the pictures of the yearbooks from the major contest, I would see Wee's work in there, and I would see other stuff that he had done. And I've always kind of picked and chosen things from other people's work to kind of incorporate into mine, and Wee's been a major influence. And that's why I love coming to conferences like this too, because I can sit in the audience and look at your work and kind of steal things that are great. Loved seeing Candace's work yesterday, and Mauricio blew me away. Just blew me away. Early in his talk, he's like, "Oh, I'm not a photojournalist." Fuck that, man. He's like one of the most brilliant photojournalists I've ever seen. And the great thing is that he has no training. It all comes from inside of him, and he's just kind of been able to unleash that. And that's where I feel really blessed and lucky, is because I found something that I'm good at. And it was more by happenstance than a plan, but I couldn't imagine like doing a 9 to 5 and getting up every morning and hating my life. I just love getting up. And so it's just, I'm so happy to be a photojournalist and a photographer in general. I'm just going to whip through my work and kind of just talk a little bit about it and kind of talk about my process. As a newspaper photographer, I do a little of everything. I'm a news photographer, I'm a feature photographer, I'm a portrait photographer, I'm a food photographer, I'm a sports photographer. Whatever I have to be, I am. And so I think over the years, I've kind of been able to kind of have like this tool belt of gimmicks and cliches and skills that I kind of pull out when I think that they fit the situation. I use available light 99.9999% of the time. And I just love it. And I especially love unnatural light. This was from a protest in Berkeley last year, and I followed her around for a little bit. And at one point, the protest march stopped, and she was looking down at her iPhone. And kind of in the pure Candace way, I was right in front of her, and she just kind of looked up at me. And just being lit by her iPhone just kind of really kind of added to the mood of the scene. Candace talked a lot about Chicago. When you work in Chicago, violence is an everyday activity. And I, too, took over her 2 to 10 p.m. shift, and so I became the funeral vigil person. And I did, I love people I photograph, and I respect them, and I care for them. And so I was always respectful. And if I don't get permission, I'm very timid, my photographs aren't that good. But when people give me permission, I'm fine. This was from a funeral of 2 brothers who were killed, and I was sent to their house. Actually, it was part of another story. I kind of arrived at their house kind of tangentially, and I was welcomed. And the aunt of the boys who were killed pulled me up to the porch and said, "You have to talk to the mother. You have to talk to the mother." And I talked to the mother, and she's like, "Thank you for being here. And will you please come shoot my boy's funeral?" And I was just like, "Okay." But once I was given that permission, I felt like I could move in and I could make moments, and I could go places where a lot of times as a photojournalist, you're across the street with a 400 and you feel like a creep and a vulture, and it's horrible and you hate being there. But when you're invited in, I feel like I have the the duty to kind of respect these people. And it's really kind of an interesting phenomenon. And I've always kind of known that the lower you are on the kind of the socioeconomical scale, the more open you are with your emotion. And I don't know what that connection is, but I've always seen that. Usually, people who are wealthy are really private and they don't want to open up their lives, but people who are struggling are just so generous with their time, and I really appreciate that. So I would do all this violence coverage, but I just didn't want to stand outside the police tape. I just didn't want to, do the photojournalism thing. I wanted to try to find stories that kind of told more about the community, that were more universal. And this one day, that it was just, another crime scene in Chicago. It happened to be across from a school. And I just saw these kids approach this police officer, and it just seemed to be this really sad kind of way that Chicago and some other cities in America, Baltimore and Detroit, are kind of, it's becoming a daily thing for these children. Like seeing police tape or seeing an officer with a big gun is normal for these kids. And I just like photos like this that kind of draw you in and kind of tell a different story in a kind of more subtle way. So then I also decided to follow this one group. They were motorcycle club members. And what they would do is there would be, say, a shooting at 65th and Stony Island in Chicago. So they would gather and they would just 50, 100 of them would drive there unannounced, and they would have like an impromptu peace march, and they would just show up. Like no one would know that they were there or know that they were coming. And so it became this really interesting thing where they would just show up and people would start coming out of their houses and they were wondering what was going on because they would just roar up the street. And this was Dawn Valenti. She does a lot of work in the community with mothers who have lost children, and she was the kind of the driving force in this. And so they would get in the middle of the street and they would just start yelling, because there's a code in the city where even if you know something, if someone was shot and killed and you knew who did it, you don't say anything because that's the code. So they were trying to break that code. They were trying to get people to anonymously tell the police who had murdered someone. And this is actually the house of the two brothers where I met the mother. So it was just, once again, they would do it once a week, and I would kind of go out and just try to capture it in available light as best as I could. And you would meet many people along the way. This was a woman whose son was murdered 3 years to that date, and I'm a super empathetic person, and I just, it really kind of, it doesn't take a toll on me, but it's something that I'm really careful to respect these people in their times. And I'm always looking for the upbeat part of it. This was a young family who was being harassed by a gang in their neighborhood, and the motorcycle drivers came up just to kind of show support for them, and they gave the kids motorcycle rides, and it was just a sweet little relief from the normal kind of agitation that I would cover. And then people from the community would join in, and this was just a guy who decided he was going to lead the march that night, and it was just really an interesting thing. And each night that we would go out would be a totally different phenomenon, and they would visit different scenes, and the mothers would be so grateful that the motorcycle drivers would come out and support them. And then they would always do these burnouts at the end of it, and this was my favorite part of it. It was just really fascinating. And another story I did, which kind of ended up being a failure, was a gentleman who lived in a housing project, and his neighbor was beat up by a young child who was visiting. And so he decided he was going to take it upon himself to teach etiquette to the children of the housing project. And so he taught like fine dining, like how you set a table. It was just a fascinating story. And so he had this group of about 15, 7 to 13-year-olds, and he would teach them etiquette lessons. And so I worked on the story for about 3 months, and then a reporter got involved. And then it turned out that he was in prison for a while back, 25 years ago, but he didn't want anyone to know that. So the newspaper couldn't publish the story. So it was one of those things where you spend all this time with someone, and they're generous with their life and their time, and then nothing comes of it. And so that I've had 2 or 3 of those stories that just kind of just don't quite work out. But still, I thought this was one of my favorite stories I worked on. I was in Chicago for 50 years, and then out of the blue, I got a job offer in San Francisco, and I said, awesome, let's go. There was no thought to it, really. I have a 20-year-old daughter at UCLA. which sort of, kind of was part of it. And the winter of 2 years ago was the worst of my life, and that was a major part of it. But mostly I just needed a change. I wanted to see different things, and I always knew I'd end up in California eventually. I'm not really the Bay Area so much, but um, so the Bay Area, and I remember always kind of jealously looking at California photographers. I'm like, oh, that's not fair. They have earthquakes and mudslides and forest fires. Man, I could make great photos if I had all that stuff, you know. So I get to California, and about 2 months in, I get woken in the middle of the night and drove up to Napa for which was in California terms a very minor earthquake. It was the biggest one in 25 years, but it wasn't really like a killer earthquake. Everyone there is freaked out. They're always like, the big one's coming, and I'm not too worried about that because I don't really. I was more. I have tornado dreams. Do you guys ever have like weird dreams? I've had this string of anxiety tornado dreams for my entire photo career where there's a tornado coming and I got my camera and oh no, I don't have any film. Or wait, I left my camera in the car. Or I have my camera but I don't have a lens on it, And so it's just. And then I had my final one where I was buried up to my waist in the middle of a dirt road, and the tornado ran me over. And it was like, you guys can maybe tell me later what that all means, but it's just like. But I've yet to have earthquake anxiety dreams, so we'll see. We'll see if that starts happening. But the big story was the wine industry was affected, and there was millions of dollars of damage, and so it was pretty difficult getting into a winery. But I finally did at the end of the day, and this was one of the. I think this was lead art in the paper. I covered like 2 days after a wildfire. This was the 4th largest wildfire in California history. It started on the top of this mountain in a place called Cobb and just spread all down and destroyed just incredible amounts of things. And so I was in Chicago for a photo thing, and I got a call at the bar, hey, there's a wildfire up in Cobb, can you go? And I'm like, I'm in Chicago and I'm drunk, and so, but then 2 days later when I got back, they sent me up there, and it was surreal. It was heartbreakingly beautiful, and I just kind of drove around. And the thing about California, which is interesting, is that as a member of the media, you can go anywhere you want if there's a fire happening. You just show your press credential, they let you through the lines. There's like 50 cars of family waiting to get back to their homes that they won't let in, but as a member of the media, for some reason, you can just go wherever you want. And that surprised me because Illinois was never that kind of open for photography. And I'm not sure I made fantastic photos, but it was really kind of a really interesting educational experience for me, which is kind of weird to say that. Someone, like everyone's entire life was destroyed, and I'm like, oh, well, I learned something, so I guess sometimes I gotta watch myself. This was another story I spent a lot of time working on this year. There's huge issues in housing in the Bay Area, super expensive. I'm paying $3,600 a month for a 2-bedroom, it's like, and so this is Johnny Walker. He's a bus driver for PayPal, and he makes a fairly good amount of money, so he could afford an apartment if he wanted to, but then he would have no money left for anything else. So he chooses to live in his SUV at the end of a dead-end street and saves money. So I worked on this for a while this year, and then once again, it turns out that Johnny had a checkered past that he didn't want anyone to know about, and then the story didn't run. So, once again, it's just like, ugh, because once a newspaper knows something, they have the obligation to print it, and if the subject doesn't let them print it, then you pretty much can't run the story. But we're going to continue on this story because Johnny his kind of maybe thinks he wants to come out about his past, and hopefully he'll do that. This is an oldie. This is from 1999. I worked in a place called the Herald News in Joliet, and I met Gregory Hill, who was an HIV-positive prisoner there. And he worked in the infirmary in the prison helping the dying patients. And he's carrying David Brown, who was in the last stages of AIDS. And this was pretty much my first real photo story. I started in the business in '86, and I wanted to be a sports photographer. I wanted to work for Sports Illustrated. And I spent 11 years at a really, really bad visual paper where I did 5 to 6 assignments a day. I'd have a 9 o'clock, a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, a 1 o'clock, a 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. I'd go back to the dark room and crank out my check passing photos. And it just, I have a really kind of slow learning curve. It took me a lot of time. But once I got to this newspaper, I was kind of ready to take my work to another level and do more stories. And Gregory Hill was one of the first people who I spent a lot of time with. And the prison was awesome. Once I got past the initial red tape, I was able to kind of come and go as I wanted. And I spent many a day just sitting on Gregory Hill's floor in his cell as he read the Bible. And it was really a transformative period for me photographically, and just learning how to be, kind of, I'm active in my stories. I'm not a fly on the wall. I'm having conversations with people while I'm shooting, kind of like Candace was saying the other day. I kind of hang out and then, photo in, and just kind of, it's like a dance and you're moving in and out. So, I learned a lot on that story, and I really enjoyed my time with Gregory, and he was like one of the most incredible people I've met. This was another story I worked on a family being evicted from a trailer park, and just hanging out with the kids. It's funny, when I do these stories with families, after I'm there a while, I almost become like a pseudo babysitter, like I show up and they're like, oh, Scott's here, I'm gonna go to the store. I'm like, okay, so I end up like playing with the kids, and this was a game of hide and seek that the kids were playing, and I didn't tell the boy that she was under there, so it took a while. And then this was another one. This was from a photo project called City in the Year 2000, which was a year-long documentation of Chicago that was sponsored by the late Gary Comer, who was the founder of Land's End. And he hired a whole bunch of photographers to just document everything Chicago. I took a 3-month leave of absence from my newspaper to work on it, and this is near the neighborhood I grew up in. I wanted to do stories. I grew up in an industrial corner of Chicago. So basically, if you're downtown, you drive towards Indiana, and when it starts smelling really bad, that's where I grew up. So I wanted to document like things that I had done as a child, and so this was a community right near me. This is probably the most emotionally difficult story I ever worked on. When I was at the Chicago Tribune, not only did I have to do still photographs, but I also had to do video, and I'm not a videographer. I don't have those skills. I don't know how to collect audio. But in the kind of changing world of newspapers, you got to do it. We need video. And so I did some videos. I'll show you one now, which is super rough, and the audio is really bad. But I think technically, there's some emotion to it. So I definitely want to show it.
He was silly, funny. He was crazy. He was really strong because he could carry our mom. My dad, well, I don't have one. He died. And so it was very sad when he died. And our mom is really sad all the time because about our dad.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry. Corey was an amazing dad. That's one of the things I loved about him. I always thought he'd be a good dad, but once we had our kids, he just amazed me by what kind of father he was, and how much he adored the kids, and he had a special relationship with each one of them. Addison he called her me lady, and they had a real special bond right from the start. She just was Daddy's little girl, and she's taken his death very hard, as we all have, but she's especially maybe. Oh, Addison, she didn't need to. She's little. Here.
No! I don't want a paper. See, look, this is it.
Okay, don't draw on Addison's paper. It's all right.
No, I don't want to paint because it's baby. No! This is another
I know one day she said to me, who's going to walk me down the aisle when I get married? And, of course, that hit me right in the heart. And I thought, what 5-year-old should be thinking about something like that? They should be thinking about their Barbies. And so she takes it, she thinks about things. She thinks about it a lot, I think. They had a lot of fun together. She looks the most like Corey for sure. And so people that see her are like, wow, she is her daddy's girl for sure.
Okay, basically if you have a lipstick or anything, if she's coming over, you better lock it in a chest. If she gets it, she'll just put it on without asking. Or if she has to ask you, she'll be like, can I put on makeup? Can I put on makeup? 5 seconds later, can I put on makeup? Can I put on makeup? Can I put on makeup? Don't let her see any makeup.
Yes, I surprised the kids in October, and we went to Disney World over Halloween and November 1st. And Halloween had always been a really special day for our family. My husband had always said it since our son was little. Actually, before even we had our son, we dressed up as a couple, and we both dressed up, and our whole entire family dressed up for Halloween. It was just a fun day for us. We all coordinated our outfits, and so I wanted to celebrate his life rather than dwelling on the sorrow that we had last year. And so I figured Disney World is a place to do that. And I wanted to dress up and trick or treat, but we couldn't do our normal, usual thing. I think that would have been too hard and too difficult and sad. But we had a great time at Disney World, and the kids were totally shocked. We'd never been there, and it was a great surprise, and it was a great way to celebrate the life that we had together rather than, focusing on the loss that we had.
Thank you. So I got on this story late. Corey was killed while jogging, and 3 months later, the community had got together to have a big benefit. And so basically, I was assigned to photograph the benefit for just the next day's story, documenting how this community had shown up for this family. And it's a typical newspaper assignment. Go there at 2 o'clock, and take photos for a little bit. So I knocked on the door, and Alyssa, the mom, let me in, and I turn around the corner, and the first thing I see is Addison on the couch like this with a picture of her dad. So like I literally made that photo 30 seconds after I met the family. And even though the story was about the community, I knew my story was Addison. So for me, I'm always trying to find my story. And so I spent, as a newspaper photographer, it's always the same. It's crazy. So I show up, and I took that photo, and then all of a sudden Alyssa's like, well, what do you want us to do? We can play a game. And so it's like always the same thing. So they play a game. They get on the floor, and they fake like they're playing a game, and I get down. And I always sit on the floor and try to get below people when I do a story when I first meet them, because I want to show that I'm submissive to them, that I'm below them. And I want to try to make them comfortable. So psychologically, I always try to be below people. One, I like the angle better, but two, it makes people more comfortable. So anyways, I spent maybe 2, 3, 4 hours with them, and then I asked if I could expand the story, and they agreed. And so it was, the 2 youngest were Kendall and Brooke, and they were 2 and 3 at the time. And my first 2 or 3 visits, they would hit me and punch me, and they were really angry, and I knew that they were kind of working through some of the issues with their dad leaving them. And then all of a sudden, they like bonded with me, and they wouldn't let go, and they would hug me all the time, and I would spend all this time with them. And then I started thinking, I'm going to leave these girls. I'm going to spend 9 months with them. I'm going to fall in love with them. They're going to fall in love with me. And then I'm going to leave them. And what am I doing? Am I showing them that men always leave? Their dad left. I show up, I leave. It's like, and I don't know. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if it's true, if they're really feeling that way. But it's something that I really think about. And I try to stay in touch with people, and I try to, go to their birthday parties afterwards, but you just can't do it. You start having this whole collection of people you love that you leave behind you, and like that's the struggle. I think that's the most difficult part. I get a great gift, and I love it, and it enriches my life, but it's like I don't want my wake to be more sadness, and so that's something that I think about a lot, and so, but my life is better for meeting them, and I hope I made their lives better, and hopefully someday, like I can reconnect with them a little bit. All right, sorry about that, guys. Okay, back to newspaper stuff. So this is just a recent blood moon photo that I took, and I got in really big trouble at the newspaper because I didn't shoot a tight detail of the moon. And you know, I seriously, I work at a great paper with like really progressive, wonderful editors, but for some reason there was something about this assignment. I got called in the office, I had to have a meeting, it's just like, well, Scott, we sent you this because we thought you would like do a good job, but you didn't take a tight photo of the moon. And I'm like, then why'd you send me? It's like, I'm like, that's not what I do. This was one of my funner stories. I worked, I went downstate Illinois to do a story on the corn crop. And so I went to the local jeweler who also was a farmer, and I met him there, and basically to just do a really cheesy business photo of him walking through his cornfield. Total fake reality. Newspapers own fake reality. Everything, like 50% of my assignments are go someplace and pretend it's real, so it drives me crazy. So I try to find real things in fake, but I'm getting off on a tangent. But anyway, so I drove with this farmer out to his farm field, and I saw a big water tower that said Hoopston, sweet corn capital of the world. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, is it? And he's like, well, it used to be, not anymore. We only have one cannery left, and but we do have this Sweetheart Festival every year, Sweet Corn Festival, where we have this national sweetheart pageant. And basically, runners-up from Miss America qualifying pageants around the country pay their own way to come our pageant, and they practice their skills so maybe they could be Miss America in the future. And I'm like, this is great. It's like a pageant of beauty losers. I'm like, this is going to be great. And so I pitched it to my newspaper, and they were like, great. So I went and spent a good part of the week. And one of the days, they went on a tour of the bean canning factory. But I get there, and they're like, oh, no, you can't come with. We have proprietary bean canning technology that can't get out. And I'm like, really? So I had to stand in the quality control room for 45 minutes. But as it was great because this little old guy comes out and he starts opening up these big cans of beans and pouring them out. And I'm like, oh, this might be good. And so then when the women came, they're like, oh, thank you for coming. We would like you to sample the 7 types of beans that we can here at the factory. And they're all like, yeah. And so anyway, it's like Miss Kentucky's definitely my favorite. And I remember someone after I showed this one said, oh, I love that photo. It just really shows the homogenation of beauty in America. What were you thinking when you took that photo? And I was like, I hope it's in focus. It's just like I don't really put any thought to my photographs like before I take them. I think that's all in the editing. That's where I can say, oh, yes, this is what I was trying to say. But most of the time, I'm just like kind of in my brain kind of trying to figure out what the best angle is. This was at a recent crowdsourced fashion show, and this guy came out with a fishbowl helmet. And I don't use strobes, but I use other people's strobes. And so there was a guy there who was just like strobe. So I'm like, maybe I'll put a slow shutter speed and see what I can do. And this was like by far the best photo I had. And like all the ones of my exposures weren't that good, but the one where I kind of got his flash, just really kind of made it. I want to work for a motivational poster company someday, and this is my first one. So, anyways, I'm always looking for like little essays to do, and so one year after a snowstorm, well, in Chicago, if you've ever been to Chicago, there's this thing called dibs, where you shovel out your parking spot and then you put out an ironing board, or you put out your dinner table, or you put out, something to this is my spot. I shoveled it out, don't take it. And it's serious business. If you park there, they'll like slash your tires, or they'll put a hose on your car and freeze it solid, It's just, you don't mess around with this. So one day I decided to just drive around the Pilsen neighborhood and photograph all the different types of chairs that people use to save their parking spots. And it was really interesting because like there wasn't the same chair at all, but there were a lot of them, like everything was different. It just like I just couldn't believe it. It was so much fun, and I really, really enjoyed it. I guess it's a chair, sort of. You can sit on it. Yeah, this guy didn't even shovel. He just threw his chair out there. And as you can see, it's on the poster back then if you saw it. I put them all together in a grid. And this is like one of the few things I had hanging in my house, but I lost it in my last divorce. So anyways, I'm going to have to get another copy of it. But I have one now, which is great. But I love grids. I don't know if you know, like, I think one of the things I'm really interested in are things that are the same but different. You know, they have to have like some sort of theme. I really love portrait series, so I've been starting to try to do that a little bit more. You know, the Liberty tax waivers are perfect because they're supposed to be dressed as a Statue of Liberty, but none of them look the same, and I don't know where they get all these things from because they're all different, and they're all really weird, and I don't know, really, but, you know, it's just But basically my approach was I had a 51-2, and I would walk up these people and hi, I'm from the Tribune, can I make your portrait? Don't smile. You know, that was like my entire strategy, and everyone was super cool with it. Did you ever see what is it, Blades of Glory with Will Ferrell? And he's like a wizard, and he's really drunk, and he like throws up in his suit. There's definitely vomit in there somewhere, I know, I think. Yeah, so I had a lot of fun with this, and you know, that's mostly, this guy made like a little guitar, he's like, anyways, but that's how, basically my job is designed to entertain myself, that's what I try to do, I try to have fun with it. Like I said, I never use a strobe unless I really think it would work well with the subject matter. WrestleMania came to the Bay Area this year, and I had to go shoot a fan night where they all stood in line to get autographs. So I asked my editors, I'm like, do you mind if I just like strobe the shit out of this and just make it look really paparazzi-like? And they're like, yeah, knock yourself out. And so I basically just walked around and looking for details and just, you know, zooming out my flash and just trying to make it look as kind of weird and bizarre that it is. I love subcultures, you know, I think we all do. It's just like little cliques and little, you know, groups that kind of band together. Really is fascinated by that. There are a lot of people dressed as Hulk Hogan dropping feathers everywhere. So this is why I'm a photographer, why I'm a photojournalist. My love of sports. I was a sports fan growing up in Chicago. I took my dad's camera to the stands, and we would sit in the 20th row, and I would shoot with a 35 millimeter lens. And I'd take the pictures to Walgreens, and I'd get them back, and then I'd cut out the tiny little bit of action that I had. And I had this photo album that had like 50 photos on each page. They were just tiny little action. And so I just kind of learned, that's the way I kind of learned. And I'm not a big fan of sports action unless it's really different, you know, but I do like, you know, just things that you don't really see that often. And this is why I love still photography, because like if you saw this in video, the guy's just like flipping down the sidelines, but when you slow it down and freeze it, it's just like, hey Scott, what's up, man? What are you doing after the game? Want to get some dinner? Okay, cool. I got to score this touchdown, but we'll talk later, you know? It's just like, it's just so calm. Because the weird thing about, well, a lot of times in action, you know, they close their eyes. Like Candace said, if they close their eyes, you're dead. You know, so it's nice to have an eye open there. This was at a Cubs game, and I just kind of followed the bat into the stands. And I love the kid with the death grip on the cheeseburger. He's like, yeah, I'm not giving this up. But of course, everyone's freaking out except for the mom of the girl who gets hit in the head with the bat. You know, she's just kind of looking off. But no one was seriously injured, and the cheeseburger survived, so it was all good. Yeah, I love stuff that only happens like once a season or once in a career. You know, it just really interests me. I got to shoot surfing for the first time. This is the famed Mavericks. And what I didn't realize is that when you shoot surfing, the action's like a mile away, you know. It's just like, you know, I'm not good enough to go out on a ski jet or, you know, get out in the water, but it still was pretty interesting. It's still the only time I've shot surfing, and I was happy to get this. So from the Chicago Marathon, my last wife had bladder cancer, and so she decided she wanted to run the Chicago Marathon. And so as a good husband, I'm like, okay, I'll do it too. And so I trained to run the marathon, and then she had some complications, so then I just ran it by myself. But then the next year she came back and ran it. So I dragged my 2 kids and her 2 kids out to the marathon, and so as we were waiting for her to come by, I was bored and just kind of screwing around with just different time things. Like Mauricio said yesterday, just experiment, try things different. And so I just basically set the camera on the ground and set it to 1-second exposure just to see what it would look like. And it ended up being beautiful. I had all this whole series of it was just flowing, and the colors were great. And it was just, once again, it was just like kind of just by just playing around, I think a lot of good things happen. This was a portrait. Well, it wasn't really a portrait. It is a portrait, but it was just before the game. And Raleigh Fingers from the Oakland A's, Hall of Famer, known for his handlebar mustache. So I just kind of was playing with that. This is my kind of sports action photo. It's like, I'm not sure the mom of this girl was happy this ran the paper, but oh well. This is titled, "Does a Bear Shit in the Woods?" So anyways, this was Gabe Karimi, who was a rookie for the Bears, and shooting NFL training camp is so boring because it's all just like basically mug shots of players. But for some reason I saw Gabe, and he like kind of climbed over this rope and was heading into the stands, and I followed him, and he was a rookie, so he didn't know that they weren't supposed to use the bathrooms what the public did. So I just kind of stood there and waited outside, and when he came out, luckily people started coming up, and this woman who was going to go eat her ice cream cone in the porta potty. I don't know. But Gabe walked out, he looks up and goes, "Oh shit," because he knew that I had made his photo, and so of course I put it on Twitter and it went viral and stuff, and so this is my family photo. This is my son. That's Yorkville, Illinois. The middle school had this great football field that was elevated above the cornfields, and I became the team photographer. And when I moved, I dragged my kid out of high school before his senior year to move into California. And the football team moms were so pissed off. They're like, "What? You're leaving? You can't leave with this senior year?" And it was the best year in school history, and they went to the playoffs, and they were all mad that I wasn't there to document it. So, oh well. In 2010, when the Chicago Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup, I knew of this tradition where each player gets a Stanley Cup for 24 hours. The keepers of the cup from the Hockey Hall of Fame fly it to whatever town, their hometown, and the players get 24 hours to do whatever they want. And it was so much fun. I went to Paris and Slovakia and Sweden and Finland and Roseau, Minnesota, where this is Dustin Byfuglien letting his dog drink beer out of the Stanley Cup. And this was at a party in Chicago suburbs where the party got so raucous that the keepers of the cup moved it to the laundry room. And this was in Toronto. This is Dave Boland. Once again, I like using other people's strobes. It's just kind of, I always think it looks much better. I could never recreate this if I wanted to. Or not recreate it, but I couldn't orchestrate it. I've shot 3 Olympic Games. It was always a dream of mine, and I love shooting the Olympics. The difficult thing is you're there with 1,000 other photographers, so getting something different is always a challenge. So this was one night, a foggy night, where I got to shoot ski jumping. And I'd never shot ski jumping before, so when I pre-visualized this photo, I thought, hey, there's going to be a guy way up here. But then I didn't realize that ski jumpers really only get about 10 feet off the pole. They just kind of follow it down. So lucky it kind of snuck into the corner. So that was Torino, Italy. This was in Beijing. This was Michael Phelps' 6th gold medal. I got to shoot all of them. And by like 3 or 4 gold medals, we all realized that Michael would toss his flowers up to his mom after every gold medal. And so I just happened to be positioned by her. So I asked her, like before this all happened, if I could kind of shoot by her. And she was just like, sure, that's fine. And so when Michael got his gold medal and started parading towards his mom, I stood up on a chair to kind of get over her shoulder. And then this nice Chinese usher kind of came to me and told me I had to get down. And he didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Mandarin. And it was just kind of this like really kind of, I just like, can I just shoot you in 2 minutes, and stuff. And so he let me stay. And But I like these photos where it's just kind of like almost like the subject's eye view, you know. I must have been really close. I must have like been right next to her face, but it just kind of worked out. But then the one bad thing is like the autofocus is focused on the flowers. You know, I wanted it to be on his face, and so I remember watching the POI contest being judged online this year, and I thought this had a really good chance of winning. And one of the judges was Brian Plonka, who's like this great influence of mine who worked at the same newspaper I did before I got there. And it comes by and he's like, yeah, I like it, but it's out of focus. I'm like, oh, no. Ooh, that was exciting. Sorry. Okay. So anyways, so like, you ever have a photo where you look at it and like you just see the flaws, kind of like when you look in the mirror in the morning? But anyway, so this was outside the water cube in Beijing where they did the swimming. I was an art major, so I think I'm more influenced by painters than I am photographers. So anytime I can kind of do anything that's design kind of formulated or whatever. This is a black car that was parked in the parking lot, so just reflecting off of the trunk in the back window. Once again, another like thing that probably never will happen again. This was Halloween night. Derrick Rose from the Bulls made a game-winning shot. So I photographed him leaving the court and walking back to the locker room. And all of a sudden, this guy came by dressed as, I don't know, Marie Antoinette. And, you know, he knew him because I think he was a Bulls employee, so it was just really casual, like low five, you know. But I really enjoyed it. This is Jackie Robinson West Little League team. They actually won the Little League World Series 2 years ago and then got disqualified for having kids who lived out of the district. But this was the year before when they lost in the final game before the World Series. And you know, this is why I like getting low. This kid's like 4'8", you know, and so I'm way on the ground and you know, I'm using Candace's hand approach to photography. I'm waiting for a hand, and so this is his grandmother wiping away a tear. This was on the NBA Finals last year. LeBron headbutted a TV cameraman. So I've been in San Francisco for a little over a year. I've shot a World Series championship, an NBA Finals championship, an earthquake, so it's been pretty good. This is Steph Curry. I'm in that reflection somewhere. And this was the parade in Oakland. I love Oakland. I love the underdog, you know, so when you're in San Francisco, Oakland is all you get shit on, and Oakland has the worst reputation, but I really love Oakland, and it was so great for the community to be able to celebrate this championship. And the little teeny head there underneath Steph Curry is his daughter Riley, who was fantastic. I don't know if any of you are a sports fan, but she would like come to his press conferences and just like totally disrupt everything, and she was awesome. So I've always kind of been looking to do stuff to fill up my time. So I started doing this photos column back in the mid-2000s called Heart and Soul, where I would show up to a random high school, a random sport, and just kind of try to find a moment and write about it. So I did that for 2 years, and it became a drag having to like reestablish access every single time. Like I had to sell myself every time. Hi, I'm from the Chicago Tribune. I do this photo column called Heart and Soul. I basically blah, 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 blah. And most of the time people were cool, but I wanted something that I didn't have to reestablish that access every time. So I decided to try to do a thing called The Season, where I followed an entire team through the fall season, a different team through the winter season, a different one through the spring season. So the first one was Joliet Catholic Girls Volleyball. And a guy I worked with's wife coached the team, so I knew I would be able to get the access. Because it's like kind of hard to say, hi, I'm 46 years old, can I spend an entire season with teenage girls? You know, it's just like, so, you know, it definitely was something where people had to already have trust me. So the one thing that I liked most about the season was they'd had this pre-visualization routine that they did before every match, and they would just kind of put their feet up against the wall and kind of get in a zone and think about what they wanted to do. And like every time they would go to a different place, it would be a little bit different because it would be a different scenario. And then I think they started knowing that I was doing this, so they would try to find more creative ways to do it, you know. I wasn't telling them anything, but I wasn't really arguing with it, but it was like, you know, they would, you know, sometimes they would go outside or, you know, sometimes they'd go inside, so it just became this kind of cool where, once again, it's same, but it's different, and I love that, you know. But they were great. Like, I loved all the girls. They were great, except for Kelly Murphy, who was like the National Volleyball Player of the Year that last year, and like painfully self-conscious. And I remember on Facebook, there was a shot one of the girls put on of all the girls on the bus after a victory, and I'm in the background, this creepy, sweaty man, like taking photos. And someone like commented, "Who's that guy?" And Kelly Murphy writes, "He's a creep. He's the ultimate creep." And I'm like, oh. Then I went, wait, that is what I am. It's actually a compliment, because it's like, just. So anyway, but it had to be difficult for these girls, to like have me there photographing them and putting it on social media and stuff. And so anyways, so I really kind of enjoyed my season with them and did a couple more after that which were fun also. Candace said yesterday that she's like a walking cliche, right? And so like I love shooting cliche things, but I love kind of shooting cliches, but then they're cliches for a reason because they're valid. We're shooting. So I did like the ultimate cliche in the sports world. I followed a minor league baseball team around. It's in the town I moved to, San Rafael, and it's always great when you show up and the president of the organization says, you can go anywhere you want and do whatever you want. I'm like, awesome. Because like the one thing you always want to do in sports is get into the clubhouse or get into the locker room. That's where you want to be. And a lot of times that's difficult, but the San Rafael Pacifics were awesome with that. So I was able to just kind of come in and out at all times whenever I wanted and just kind of do whatever I wanted to do. And it was, of course, this great kind of ramshackle little field, and you had the perfect amount of funk to it, definitely. And it had a very small fan base, but they were very ardent. And the players lived in the community, lived in the houses with the families. But I just concentrated on just staying at the park and just kind of shooting what I saw. But once again, stand there until they ignore you. Like basically, if you just take Mauricio and Candace's their presentations and put them together, you really don't have to look at mine. It's like I'm just basically saying the same things. But just like always trying to go on the other side of things. And these guys were just like super into it. I don't think they were even getting paid, but they just really loved it. I missed the soup Nazi. He was there last year, I think. And then they had the great, this guy Xander, who was Down syndrome, and he was their club manager, and he was awesome. So it was just kind of like this, like a photojournalism dream, like all this stuff was happening. And they had this great little wall where players would come and go, and they had like a little monument to them. And then there was a wedding. One of the outfielders decided to get married, Bull Durham style, on the field, and so this is my wedding photography I'm going to show you. So this is Michael and his son. But as the light there was so beautiful. Yeah, so it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And then he got dressed and played the game, which I thought was cool. And then the team won the championship, which was awesome. And because like I was the only photographer there, I could run out in the field. So it was like a walk-off win. So the guy hit a single and was coming around to score, and I was out on the field with the players like as the guy was scoring the winning run, which you obviously can't do anywhere. So that was great. And these guys celebrated like it was the end of the world. Like I shot the Giants winning the World Series and the Warriors winning the NBA championship, and these guys blew them all away. Just like this celebration never ended. It just kept going on. And I like stopped taking pictures. I'm just like, how many photos do I really need of this? It's just kind of. But yeah, I was just like, But that was by far my favorite. And so basically all that photos, I only shot 3 games. That's 3 games. I like went to one game, left in like the 7th inning. I showed up for the wedding, left before the game started, and then I shot the championship game. So it's like, I think that's like the thing, I'm more efficient now. And I actually think is efficient on there? It might be. I'm more efficient now where I think I can go in and make photographs without, even though I take a lot of photos, I still think my percentage of photos is much better than it used to be. I'm all over the board photographically. I love so many different styles and so many different parts of photography. And street photography is my current passion. When I was 13, I was raised by the television. So my parents worked. I would come home from school. I'd get a big ass bowl of Captain Crunch, and I'd sit in front of the TV, until they got home. And one of the things I would watch on my television in Chicago in 1978 with my 4 channels, was PBS, and they had this great series of half-an-hour shows on different photographers. And I knew nothing about photography. I wasn't interested in photographers, but it just was something to watch. And so I remember seeing one on sports photographer and one on a news photographer. And then I saw this one on this crazy man in New York who would walk around with a Leica just kind of shooting weird things. And it ended up being Gary Winogrand, who is like probably one of my favorite all-time photographers. And if you don't know his work, definitely track it down. But I never, at the time, I was interested in it, but I never really thought it was something I would ever do. And then I got to newspapers, and I spent 20 years at newspapers, and I would walk down the street, and I would see someone smoking in the shaft of light, and I'd be like, that's cool, but what am I going to do with that? Like, a newspaper is not going to publish a photo of someone smoking on the corner, And so I never really kind of thought about it. But then, after shooting for decades and showing up at an assignment and people knowing you're the photographer and people acting differently, and like, I felt that I love my newspaper photography. I think it's a little bit of hyper reality, and I also think that it's not pure because people know they're being photographed. I decided, I started really being drawn to street photography, and I photograph kids a lot with my job. So I really, over the years, learned how to shoot without the camera to my eye. So I would do a lot of shooting from the hip, or getting the camera low, or just standing there while they're looking at me and I'm shooting them. And so I've gotten really good at controlling the camera without looking at it. So I started doing street photography with my big, clunky 35 millimeter, just walking down the street. But no one would notice. No one would ever notice because I didn't have the camera to my eye. And although occasionally people would notice in Chicago because it's Midwestern values, someone walking behind me would always be like, hey, I see what you're doing there. I'm like, what? I see what you're doing there. You're taking pictures. You're taking pictures of people without them knowing. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a street photographer, and like most people, and I just say, oh, I'm from the Chicago Tribune, and then be like, oh, okay, that's great. But one day, this guy was walking behind me, and I'd just seen a documentary on Bruce Gilden, and so he's this brash New York photographer who gets right in people's faces, and he said on there, someone was mad at him. He said, who are you? You're not the police of the streets, and he was like really confrontational, and so I had that in my head, and so this guy behind me is walking, he's like, I see what you're doing, the same old thing, and I'm like, who made you the police of the streets? And the guy pushes me into Michigan Avenue. Luckily, it was a red light and stuff, but I'm like, I guess I'm not Bruce Gilden, because it didn't quite go over as well. I think I'll go back to the sugar approach. So, but then I went on a college visit with my daughter to George Washington University in D.C., and she had an iPhone. And I'd seen a lot of hipstamatic work. Damon Winter did the hipstamatic piece in Afghanistan, I believe. And so I started getting interested in shooting with the iPhone. And so I borrowed my daughter's iPhone and downloaded hipstamatic and started doing it in DC, and I was hooked. And I love doing that. So this is just a couple with my big camera. So when I do street photography with my iPhone, I always have my big camera around my neck. So this was in San Francisco this year. And I just happened to see this scene, and it was too good to waste on the iPhone. Because for me, my iPhone is like sketching on a napkin at a bar. It's a doodle. I don't really consider it like, I don't know. It's not like, it's just kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just kind of how I see the world. But it's also just kind of very temporary, and I want it to just be kind of a stream of consciousness, and not really like something that's permanent. So I do a ton of street photography. I use, like I said, the Hipstamatic app. It's a little vignette-y for people. It's a little funky. I think some people don't like it, but I like it, and so I really don't give a shit. It's like, Because this is for me. This is the only work I do for me. You know, like when I'm at work, it's a job, and I do tend to put my art into it. But at the end of the day, I'm shooting for the readers. I'm not shooting for me. But this is me shooting for myself. So when I go places, I try to at least carve out a little bit of time to do some street photography. This is in LA. Obviously the Golden Gate Bridge. This is in Chinatown in San Francisco, which is amazing. This is in LA also. And I also love these little kind of subsets I do. And these are called accidental portraits. Because I'm always, when I shoot, I'm basically walking down the street with it at my hip, you know, doing kind of some stealth things. And I always shoot while I'm walking. It's like maybe 1 in 1,000 times I'll see a good scene and I'll work it a little bit. But usually it's just I'm walking and shooting. And I think my sports photography background is good for it because I can kind of see things developing. So as I'm walking down the street, okay, here's a woman with a balloon and here's a dog, and you just kind of see it all come together, and it's there and it's gone. And that's what's great. It's just so temporary, and the ballet of the street is so amazing because it's just like these moments come together and they go away. They come together, go away, and it's like all these moving parts, and none of them really are working together, but they're working together, and I just find it fascinating. Another one of my street portraits that really isn't a street portrait. I love the silhouette. I'm sorry. I know it's cliche, but I can't stop. And I'm always like putting some stupid sign in the background. That's like another thing I do all the time. Well, this isn't stupid, but I always put signs in the background. And the homeless are very, very well educated in San Francisco. They like Glamour magazine. And this was iPhone chess that I was playing at the. This is where I live now. I was working out in my workout room and saw this lady in the pool, so I creeped on her a little bit. And then I came here and I creeped on someone too. Have we determined who this is yet? Is it? Okay. All right. Anyways, so this is what I do in my hotel room by myself. Occasionally I'll shoot color. Very, very rarely. This was fun. This is a site called Echo Site. So basically, they get 2 photographers from different parts of the world, and you combine photos in Image Blender and post them on there. So I was invited to do it, and I contacted a photographer named Logan Mock-Bunting, who now lives in Hawaii. He does a lot of underwater work. And so he sent me 100 of his underwater photos, and I spent about a week putting them together, and it was so much fun. And I really, it was just it was just kind of this great way to kind of collaborate and kind of expand my work, and just really, really enjoyed doing it. But yeah, and it was cool too, because his work is the centerpiece of these collaborations, and mine's kind of the background, and I really like that a lot. But yeah, so check out Echo Site. It's on Instagram. It's also, I think they have a Tumblr page too. All right, so the last thing I'm going to show you is something called Common Ground. This is a photo I took in May of 1994. I was working for the Daily Southtown newspaper in Chicago, the shitty paper I was talking about before that was non-visual. I had an assignment to shoot 4 different families who raised animals in a place called Homer Township, which is about 35 miles southwest of Chicago. And my 4th subject were Harlow and Jean Cagwin, and they raised Angus beef cattle on a 114-acre farm. And my assignment was to spend 2 hours with them. And I went there, and I kind of hung out, and I stayed a little bit longer than the 2 hours, and just photographed them going through their day. And as I was leaving, I just kind of, being a city boy, I asked Jean and Harlow, hey, can I come back at some point and maybe photograph you guys some more? And they were like, that's fine, we'd love to have you by. So over the next 2 or 3 years, I would stop by every maybe 2 or 3 months, and it would be the same thing every time. I would show up, and Jean and Harlow would be working, and they'd be like, oh, hey, Scott, and they would come in, and Jean would sit around the kitchen table. She would bring out a dessert, and we would talk. And I wasn't really photographing that much. They kind of became my friends. And then my children started getting older, and I would bring them out, and they would love playing with the farm cats and looking at the cows. And so it wasn't really a photo project. I would take photos occasionally, but it just kind of was what it was. But then I moved from the Daily Southtown to the Herald News, which was like this crazy, you got to be doing photo stories all the time. What projects do you have? And so, like, kind of out of desperation, I was like, well, I know these farmers. Maybe I can do a story on them. And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And so I pretty much had to sit down with Gene and Harlow and say, next time I come out, can we, like, yeah, I love hanging out with you guys, but can you maybe just keep working, and I can just photograph you going through your day? And that was all it took. And then after that, it was fine. So then I just kind of started being more of a photographer than just a friend. And they had a very difficult life, but they loved it. They weren't making much money. They lived in a house. Harlow was born down the road, and he moved to this house when he was 5. So at the time, he was 71. So he had spent 65 years in this same home. And Jean married him when she was 35 and moved into the house. And they never had any children, and so they just raised their cattle together. And those were their children. So I would, at the time I was a single dad. I was raising my 2 kids. I had a full-time job. So I was off Sundays and Mondays. So when I would drop my kids off at school, I would spend the day with Gene and Harlow on Mondays, and then I would pick them up after school. So my work always ended up just being like in the daytime. It wasn't, I would occasionally go at night maybe, but not that often. So I was just collecting photos. I wasn't really doing much with them. But for me, it was a great way to kind of perfect my craft, because it was a very redundant lifestyle. So every day was the same thing, so I could reshoot things. And occasionally something interesting would happen. This was one day when a day-old calf got loose, and Jean went out in the field looking for it, and she couldn't find it. And I knew that it was an interesting thing, so I actually came back before work on Tuesday, and when they got up to start looking for it, and they found the calf, and Harlow went and kind of tried to lasso it and fell down, and it was just kind of this comedic tragedy. And Jean was laughing, and it was a very kind of, for me, like a telling moment, because it kind of showed me that Harlow was getting pretty old, and he was in his mid-70s now, and this very difficult labor-intensive job that was getting a little bit too much for him. And a lot of the area around them was starting to be sold to other businesses. To subdivision developers, I'm sorry. And people were moving into the kids would come, and they wanted to pet the cows, and Harlow was really agitated by that. And so you could kind of see things changing, and you could see that eventually that Gene and Harlow would probably sell their farm and leave. A lot of my photos are Harlow just kind of slumped down, but there were occasional light moments. This is one of Harlow's neighbors, and that's 2 of his 3 sisters in the background. But once again, it was still like really hard on his body. He had arthritis and carpal tunnel syndrome, and he had asthma, but he was like the hardest working man I've ever seen by far. And so once again, the whole issue of suburban sprawl started to come in. So the story started out as basically the day in the life of 2 farmers, and then it kind of became a story in aging. Then it kind of became a story of the disappearing family farm, and then suburban sprawl kind of became the topic that I was interested in. And so this was a picnic that Harlow went to, and he was talking with a fellow farmer on all the different farms that had been sold. And the way you sell a farm, at least back in that day, is you don't put a for sale sign in the yard. You wait for a subdivision developer to approach you. And then finally one day they were approached, and Harlow's siblings wanted them to sell the farm. They had all grown up on the farm, and they all moved except Harlow. But they wanted their money. And so Harlow did not want to leave, but he kind of felt he had no choice. So then it started I started doing stories of them going through the process of selling their farm. This was a annexation meeting at the city of Lockport. And then they had a little community night where they showed what the subdivision was going to look like. And this is where I started getting this idea in my head that, well, maybe the story is going to be about the land, and then I can kind of just do a story on the transformation of the land. But at the time, I still started documenting Harlow and Jean. They sold their property, but they were still allowed to live on the land for about 1.5 years. while the subdivision started being built around them. So that was like a really great opportunity to kind of be a transitional phase in the project. And the crazy thing is, like, all of a sudden now they had money, because they probably made about, I don't know, 10 million. There were 7 shares that went to different people, and I think their share was like, they had like 2 shares of 10 million. So they got a lot of money. So it wasn't like a super sad story. But, people are always like, oh, poor Gene and Harlow. And I'm like, oh, I don't think they're that poor. So anyway, so they started getting a new truck, and then like, they used to have Angus Beef Quarterly magazine. All of a sudden now they had Money magazine and Mutual Funds magazine, So you could definitely kind of see a change in it. But then, their land just started shrinking. They kept taking all the topsoil off, and their little island got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then, the series of lasts started happening. They rounded up the adult cattle first and took those off to auction. And then they saved about 20 calves, which they sold to their favorite customers. It was a very ceremonial day. Customers would come in one by one and purchase a calf and leave and pay their respects. It was pretty amazing. And then, I was always knew these things were happening, so I'd like pre-visualize, how am I going to shoot this? How am I going to shoot this? Like the last sold, what do I want to do for that? And so I'm like, I got to be behind Gene and Harlow and get that calf riding off. So I made this frame. Then I'm like, oh wait, I got to get the truck leaving. And so I like ran down and, was able to get this photo of like the last calf. And there's always a lot of luck involved, because every other calf that had been sold went in these like panel trucks where you couldn't see anything. And the last calf was kind of in an open air caged one where you were able to kind of see the silhouette of the cow. And I'd always kind of wanted to work these trees into a photograph, and it never quite worked. So, once again, I was like, I pre-visualize stuff, and it's never as good as it ends up being, So I don't even know why I even bother pre-visualizing, but, maybe I'm practicing to be an editor, because they do a lot of that, so. So then all the cows were gone, and it was freaky. It was so quiet. The cats were like weirded out, and there was no noise, and it was just really strange. And Harlow went into this deep depression where he just like, just napped all the time. And I would show up, and like Gene would be in the kitchen, and I'm like, where's Harlow? Well, he's sleeping. I'm like, well, can I go in the bedroom and photograph him? Oh, no, you'll wake him up. He'll get really angry, because Harlow was really cranky at the time. And so one afternoon, a photographer, Barbara Davidson, who's like this great Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer, came to talk in Illinois, and she was like, hey, will you take me to the farm? And I'm like, okay. So we went out there, and it was the same thing. Gene was in the kitchen, Harlow was sleeping. So Gene was taking us on a walk around the farm, and we were walking by Harlow's window, and it was a warm summer day. I'm like, oh, Harlow's in there sleeping. And so this was a film camera. I wasn't able to chimp or anything, so I kind of guessed on exposure, and I held it up through a screened window and shot off 10 frames, and we continued the tour. And then I processed this film like 3 days later, and I was like, holy shit. And like, I could not believe that, that like this photo happened. It was like a total Hail Mary, and it was in focus, and it was exposed properly, and it was just like so symbolic of Harlow's final days. And I would always share photos with Gene and Harlow, and they loved them, except this photo. Harlow hated this photo. And, I think he saw his mortality in it. And I always thought that he would leave the farm and like die 2 weeks later. It didn't happen, thankfully. But I just kind of felt like he had lost his purpose in life for a while. But Jean was super excited, because she was building a new house. She'd lived in this crappy, drafty house for the last 30 years, and she was getting to build a brand new house. So she'd like, look at my brick sample, just like. So she was like really, really excited, and she was like, And then they started kind of taking the farm apart, and there was all these kind of just stages. And then Harlow's sisters and brother came, and they started kind of just looking for souvenirs and mementos of their childhood. And then the next step was the barns were torn down, and so this was Harlow and his three sisters watching one of the barns being torn down. And then the final day, July 2nd, 2002, the Kagmans were supposed to be out on June 1st, but they kept pushing it off and pushing it off. And the subdivision developer said, you know what, seriously, if you're not out on July 2nd, we're going to like tear the house down with you in it. Like, we got to get going. And so they scrambled to get ready, and they left a lot of stuff in the house. But once again, it was just kind of a series of lasts, and this was like the last meal in the home. And the family was there, and this is Sandy Kagman, Harlow's sister, and she came up and into her childhood bedroom, and I'm going to start crying again. And Sandy's like looking out her window and crying, and it was a super emotional moment. And once again, I'm like pre-visualizing, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? I know that they're going to tear this house down. Where do I want to go? Gene and Harlow walk out of the home together. Gene goes this way, Harlow goes that way, and I'm like, oh shit, I got to stick with Harlow. So I stuck with Harlow, and he walked around for a while, and he sat on this log in the front yard as they tore his house down. And, it's just like shooting through tears. It's just like, because it's just like, and part of it is, my connection with Harlow, and part of it is tears of, holy fuck, I can't believe I'm making this photo. This is perfect. It's just like I hate being cynical, but I'm like, oh man, this couldn't have worked out any better. So anyways, Harlow sat there for about 10 minutes, and and then he just got up, and he's like, that's it, I'm done, and they drove off, And so Harlow and Gene bought another farm about 2 hours south of Chicago. They leased it to another farmer, and then they built a house, and they lived there. And Harlow reconditioned some of his tractors, and he would just drive the tractor around the farm, and really, really enjoyed his retirement. But there was something nagging. The story's not done yet, and so I started going back and photographing the subdivision being built, and kind of just following the progress of that. But I'm not a still life photographer. I want people in my images. So then I was like, well, maybe I need to find a family, and I could maybe photograph a family living in a subdivision, and someday I could have a book, and the first half would be the farm, the second half would be the subdivision, and maybe the subdivision family would have cow salt and pepper shakers to tie it all together. I was just hoping for something, But I didn't really know what I was going to do, and I worked on this project called America 24/7. Where they hired 50 photographers in every state, and so I was one of Illinois' photographers, so I went back to the subdivision. And I found a young family. She was pregnant. They lived on Kagwan Drive, a street named after the Kagwans. And I talked to them, and the project had been published in the Tribune magazine. It was published in the Herald News, so it was published in 3 different newspapers. This was the only smart thing I've ever done in my career. At each newspaper, for some reason, I asked to retain ownership of the images, which is something that is really rare in newspaper photography. So I was able to make deals with every editor to own the project, which became like the greatest thing I ever did. So I thought I found this family, but I just never went. I never went to photograph them. It didn't seem right. And so 2003 became 2004, became 2005, became 2006, and I didn't do anything. I would stop by occasionally, but not much. And I kind of thought it would never happen. So then I was giving a talk to a class of adult photographers in a small community college called College of DePage. Like, I don't turn down any speaking engagements, Like, I spoke to a preschool once, It's like, I don't care. Like, I'll talk. Anyone who invites me anywhere, I'm gonna talk. I'm gonna, preach. And so I was invited to this College of DuPage, and some people are like, why would you go there? Why would you want to go talk to that class? And so, I showed this set of photographs, and the lights came on, and a woman raised her hand. She said, hi, I'm Amanda. I live in that subdivision. I'm like, what? She's like, I live in that subdivision. I'm like, can I come visit you? And she's like, yeah, we're having an Easter egg hunt next week, so why don't you come to that? And so it was great. They lived at the end of Cinnamon Court in a cul-de-sac. And Amanda's with her husband, Ed. They had 4 kids. 3 of them were triplets. They had a dog. One of them looked like a cow. It was just like, it was great, And so I showed up at this cul-de-sac for the Easter egg hunt. And at that time, I thought maybe I'd do a story on the whole cul-de-sac. And so I introduced myself to every family there. And I'm like, hi, I'm Scott. I'm from the Tribune. I did a story on the farmers who used to farm this land. And now I want to do a story on your cul-de-sac. Is that okay? And everyone was like, great, 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 great. And so I had the ability then to just show up whenever I wanted, photograph whoever I wanted. I didn't have to knock any doors. So it was great. It was the perfect all-access situation. But once again, I didn't know what I was going to do with the photographs, and I told him that. I'm like, I don't know, this might never be published. It's just kind of something, it's a personal project of mine. I'm not sure what's going to happen. So on the second visit, Ben, their oldest son, was wrestling with his cousin CJ in the front yard with a jump rope, and I was making the photographs, and it was a really great moment, and the light was nice, and so that night I went back and was editing my photos, and I'm like, this photo really reminds me of something, I'm like, yes, Harlow with the calf, and so I'm like, what if I do this? What if I take, the farm and put it on the left and put the subdivision on the right, and I kind of tell this story, the passing of time, by comparing and contrasting life. And so at that point, once I made that connection, it was simple. It was so simple. Like everything kind of organically developed, and I would just photograph moments. There were obviously a couple things that I would do like this, where I had the aerial of the of the farm, so I went up and did an aerial. Now I didn't have like the farm photo with me, so I wasn't really sure. But it always seemed to work out that like it would be perfectly aligned, just kind of like fate was always kind of intervening and making things work. Noel would try to escape from the yard, and I'm like, I know I have a calf looking out of a fence, So it became this game. It was so much fun. It was just kind of putting a puzzle together every time I would go out there. So this is like two of their dogs, and then the sibling of one of the dogs who Ed's parents had, and so this was them feeding cheese snacks to them, and I knew I didn't like have that photo on the left in my mind, but I had an archive of all my negatives, and I had like 500 of them scanned in, and so I said I got to have 3 cows being fed somewhere. But the great thing was I would find a photo that had 3 cows, but it'd also have a man with his back turned with a plaid shirt, and kind of like the thing. So like it always would be like working on these multiple levels, which is just crazy. And the interesting thing, one person said this to me once, Scott, it's really interesting. It's like you're taking photos from the 90s and early 2000s, from current time, and it's like your style hasn't really changed. It's like, is that like on purpose? And I'm like, well, I don't know. It's like it wasn't, so I guess I think I've evolved, but maybe I haven't. It's just like I just don't know. And then I had the second floor photo from the farm and just went up in Aiden, one of the boys' triplets' bedroom while their mom was cutting the lawn. And the kids were great because their mom was a photographer. They were used to being photographed, and especially the girls. This is Abby and Katie, and they, they're just like this kind of old souls, and they were just so wonderful to photograph. When Aiden broke his leg, I knew I had something of Harlow when he had surgery for carpal tunnel. And I show up one day and there's a corn stalk in the Grabenhofer's backyard. I'm like, oh, did you do that for me? I'm like, no. We didn't really. They also threw like a farm-themed birthday party one year, which I know they did for me. And I was just like, And that's why like I think none of those photos are in here just because I knew it was a little bit too contrived. But the thing is, like, diptychs are great because you can take 2 photos that are totally different and you put them together. It makes each one better. I don't know why. It doesn't even matter what the photographs are. But at this time, I was working on this project and I was so into it that I would go to the grocery, total strangers that would like have photos that would look like the Cagwin. So it was just totally in my mind. I was just constantly looking for the kind of changing. And this is Abby and Caton waiting for their dad to get home, and Sandy in her bedroom. So another like weird thing too is like I'm taking these really emotional, heavy moments from the farm, and I'm pairing them up with these light moments from the subdivision, and I don't think it's disrespectful to the moment, but it's like the whole point of it for me is to create a history, like a historical document of life on this piece of land, and so that's like, I think in general what I want to be is I think newspapers do a horrible job of being historians because we're always there for the highs and the lows, there's not really any middle ground. And so I love being able to just photograph daily life that's boring, but for me it's like my favorite thing to do. I actually shoot verticals occasionally. Look at that. But yeah, so like, a lot of it are like they're a lot of based on body language and just kind of really literal things. But, when I can find things that aren't quite as literal, that make statements about, culture and stuff now, that's what I think are the most successful diptychs, or kind of playing with perspective. You don't know how much music that is to my ears. I love laughter. I love when you guys laugh. This is like probably my favorite one. So this is from, the photograph on the right is the first day I shot at the Easter egg hunt, and this is the Grabenhofer's next door neighbor. And I didn't put this one together for a year. I just kind of was going through old takes and happened to put this one together, but definitely one of my favorites. This is one of my newer ones. This is from last Christmas when I was home. I went and visited them. And I went out once this year too. So now it's kind of like I go there maybe once or twice a year, and I'm still able to make about 4 to 5 new diptychs every time I go. And the girls are getting older. The triplets are getting old. They're 13 now. And the great thing is I don't have to leave this family. I'm like, they're mine forever, and I'm like, I will be there for them and shoot their weddings and do everything. And I'll promise I won't undervalue the market. Okay, I'll charge them more. I love that one because it like builds slowly, like it takes a while to work your way around it. And we got Hat Yarn Barn Gate. Yeah, like this, like I had so much fun working on this project. Like even like the sprinklers at the subdivision look like tractors. It's just like no animals were harmed in the filming of this project, though. But yeah, it's like the great thing is when you spend so much time with people, it's just like so many great moments happen. It's just like you're just standing back and waiting, playing with shapes. Yeah, so like that's the wrecking ball. But the thing is, and this is like something I've done all my life, I spend holidays with strangers, Like I spend Christmas and Thanksgiving and Halloween with strangers, while my kids are at home, and that's like something that, also is part of the deal, I think, where, my kids are great and they understand it, and they're like, oh, you're the coolest dad. We're so lucky. You're the coolest dad. So that's great. But I know that, my sisters and my mom really stepped in and helped raise my daughters and my daughter and my son. And but yeah, it's like, you kind of have to be there for the certain days, and hopefully, and I'm pretty sure my kids understand. And so that's kind of the logical closer. But these are a couple new ones from last month. But they're getting big. The kids are getting big. So I showed up at the subdivision in April of 2007. I had no idea what I was going to do with the project or what was going to happen with it. And in February 2008, I had 4 pages in National Geographic, which was like mind-blowing. And so it was great. Katie here, she went to the store with her mom and bought a copy and said to the cashier, I'm in here. And she's like, sure you are, little girl, So like this project just kind of keeps rolling along and rolling along. I showed this work for the first time in 2008 at the Mountain Workshops, and a guy there named Chad Stevens, who was a producer at a company called Media Storm, which Brian Storm runs out of New York. And Chad's like, have you shown these photos to Brian? I'm like, no. And so I showed them to Brian. He was like, oh, these are amazing. It's like, okay, this is what I want you to do. Get together all your B-roll, get together all your interviews, all your audio. Let's like do something. And I'm like, I'm just a photographer. I didn't do any of that. And he's like, all right. And so then we went back and we did some interviews, and Chad put together this 7-minute piece, which is not that one. And this, like, this is my favorite thing of mine because I didn't make it, so I kind of like that. Well, I made it, but I didn't make it.
We're watching all the buildings going down. The house was the last thing that went down. Didn't take long. It was quite an emotional thing for Harlow, because he lived there all his life. But we knew it was time. We just got in the truck and didn't look back.
I don't know how you
Say
say
it.
it. I don't know how you'd say that. It wasn't good, but that's the way it had to be.
Well, you knew it was going to happen.
The place was gone. That was the end of it.
I know that it has afforded us and the 300 some other houses in the subdivision a wonderful opportunity to place roots.
The land isn't ours necessarily. God put it here, if you will, and we're just using it. The Cagwins were using it before us, and we're using it now, and someone else will probably use it somewhere down the road for something else.
I was a young kid when he started milking cows. And then he just helped out wherever he could, and then his father got sick, and he just took the farm over. And he continued working until he was 80, I guess. The work on the farm was hard work. Harlow is a very strong man, and he could do a lot of things. Of course, I couldn't do what he could do, but I did what I could.
The kids are the reason that I get up in the morning. This home is the reason that we enjoy everything we do together as a family.
I have found my home, and it will take a lot for me to move from this house.
The saddest thing on the farm was when the cattle left. They were hauled in semi-trailers. It was a bad day. We liked our animals. We just enjoyed them. You have to enjoy them to work with them.
Maybe this stuff shouldn't be sold, I don't know. Once a house goes up there, you don't get no more beef or corn. It's gone.
The particular farmland that I'll miss seeing the most is the cornfields that were right behind Ed's parents, because now it's a Walmart. But I'm at that Walmart every other day. So, you know, I can complain that the cornfields are gone and that it's disappearing, but I'm using what they're putting there.
It's the next step in the next generation, that farmland changes to suburban, and you still see the same qualities of life even though it's no longer a farmland.
Where's the Keglin Drive?
It's down this way, right?
Yeah.
No. You know, you're telling me stories.
Where are we at?
I'm right. It was on Keglin. Keglin goes through. This goes down.
No. Yeah, you're right.
And this is Keglin Drive.
We're on Keglin Drive?
Yeah. Well, I have somebody.
Right.
I furnish the information, and that's it.
Well, this is Amanda. Amanda lives here. This is
Hi, Amanda.
Gene and Harlow.
Nice to meet you.
How you doing?
I just love that they got lost on a street named after themselves. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, so, you know, like I can't stress enough shooting for yourself, having something for yourself. You know, this is for me, you know, and this was, you know, never, the plan was never to have it be a cottage industry, you know. I'm glad that it is. But, and speaking of that, I have books to sell. So I'll be, after the group photo and after lunch, I'll just be camped out there. And I got books for $50 and I got a little PayPal swipey thing. So anyways, but yeah, it's been really an honor, and you guys like the most engaged audience I've ever spoken to, and you're also the most welcoming and humble and sweet and talented group either. This is like the most impressive photo conference I've ever been to, and I've been to hundreds. So thank you. I'm all done.